2003 CLK 320 Cabriolet. This thing's been an absolute dream for me. I'm actually going to be doing an oil change tonight. Number one, I'm going to make a change in my oil. I was told by a number of people, including a former mechanic of Mercedes, that this Royal Purple oil is fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. This is full synthetic. The car normally calls for 5W30, but of course I live down here in the Sunshine State, and we tend to run a little hotter down here. Thank God summer's almost over. But I was finding that I was running about 5 to 8 degrees warmer than my other friends who live in other parts of the country. So I'm going to go ahead and make the jump up to 10. Before we get started with what we're going to need, I want to tell you what you should have. You know I'm all about safety. No concrete blocks, no pieces of 2x4, jack stands. Get yourself a set of jack stands. And also, because I like to work on my car and then live long enough to drive it, wheel chocks, front and back. As always, the standard gloves. You're going to need an oil wrench. There's the new oil filter with the O-ring kit. Here's my 10-quart oil reservoir with the sealable cap so I can bring it back to the auto parts store and recycle responsibly. You're only going to need a 13 and an 8mm socket. Always have junk towels around. Nothing will ruin a relationship faster than using your girlfriend's or your wife's bath towels. And of course you want to have these guys handy because there's nothing worse than trying to find it if you do spill. And that typically happens when you're filling this guy up. Those of you who do change your oil on a regular basis, you know what I'm talking about. And then last but not least, a transfer pump. Because this engine retains an extra quart of oil, you're going to have to pump that last quart out. I had noticed that no one else had done a video on this, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, now that we've got the car up on jack stands, as you can see, I've left the jack under one side in the staying position. That's just in case anything happens with these jack stands. I've still at least got one last default and maybe enough time to get my dumb ass out from underneath the car. The next thing we've got to take off is this engine shroud. You have 4 bolts. These are 8mm. Okay, now that we've got all 4 bolts out of the way, you've got 2 tension clips. One is right there. One is right there. And another one on the opposite side. What you're going to do is you're just going to pull down on the shroud. And it moves out of the way, which exposes the bottom of the engine. There's your oil sump, and there is your 13mm socket that you'll need. Alright, so before we break open the 13mm bolt that's on the bottom of the engine, we want to go ahead and loosen up the oil fill reservoir. That'll allow some venting, some air down to allow that oil to escape. Okay, 13mm socket is in place. Alright, as you can see, I've already got my 13mm bolt pre-loosened. It's got this little catch grate in it which is designed to catch that bolt without making you sift through it, through the oil, to look for the bolt when you're done. So we go ahead and loosen this guy up, and we're just going to let it fall. And there we go. Oil's pretty dark. Okay, now while you're waiting for the engine to evacuate the oil, you can go ahead and come up top, remove the engine cover. There's just little tension clips that hold it in, like so. Set this guy aside. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get our oil wrench and we're going to strap it to the top of this guy. These are actually my favorite kind of wrenches. I'm really not a fan of the chrome one. I've actually scratched up engine parts before with those. I'm not really a fan of them. Okay, the way that this guy works is you wrap the strap around, pull it tight, and go ahead and wrench that guy off of there. You hear a bunch more oil drain. Now is when we take one of those junk towels, lay it around here so that it doesn't create a mess, because otherwise you get that wonderful burning oil smell for the next 6 to 8 months. Pull this whole guy out. There is your filter and the O-ring kit. We're going to go through that in just a second. Alright, now that we've pulled out the old oil filter, we let it drip dry onto this towel a little bit. First thing we want to do is we want to replace these O-rings. You'll notice this little thing of styrofoam that I got here. I put some oil in it. This part's pretty straightforward. You've got these guys right here, and you've got the O-ring kit here. So we start with number 1. I have what I call my funky screwdriver. Believe it or not, it's actually bought that way, and it is specifically designed for little things like this. It's for pulling little collar rings off. But there's number 1, and then this is what the oil is for. Put a little bit of lube on those. Here's number 2. Three. This guy right here, by the way, this is actually in case you have a different size on the end. But that guy is basically on my car, that does not go on. But I believe on the C230, you put the larger ring on there. But that basically, that makes the kit universal. And then last but not least, the big guy. Now we take the old oil filter off. compared to the new one. Let these O-rings marinate just a little bit. All I really want to do is just put a coating on them. This oil was really, really black. I am remiss in my duties. It's been a little while since I've been able to do this. It's not my fault, man. Alright, so your new oil filter is ready for the big show. So we're just going to let that guy sit while we button everything else up. But first thing we got to do, next thing we've got to do is, remember I was telling you about that extra quart of oil that's inside the motor? We got to get it out. The way we do that is with this guy. Alright, so this is our reservoir pump. Those of you who have been in adult shops before, it looks a little sexual, but it isn't. I assure you of that. Basically, this is the import. You're going to be suctioning through here, and then it will be exiting through the bottom and back into this drain pan. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it sticking out just a little bit so I can actually see and make sure that it's working and know when I've got oil actually coming out of the engine. So we're just going to barely stick that in the grate. Okay, one of the things that you'll notice on your CLK 320 is that you actually have an oil dipstick. Later models did not. They literally took that away from you. And I don't blame the Germans for doing that. If you've ever heard the term jerry-rigging, that actually comes from World War II. The British used to call the Germans the Jerrys. And when the Jerrys went on their blitzkrieg, they would actually sack other countries and other townships, and they would commandeer Czechoslovakian trucks, Polish trucks. Well, the thing is that during their blitzkrieg, their stuff would break down, and they would literally have to rig a water pump from a Czechoslovakian truck to work on a German tank, and hence the term jerry-rigged. Anyway, they don't want you touching the inside of the motor. They don't want you touching the oil or the transmission fluid. My transmission is actually locked off. I can't even open it up and pull the dipstick out because the Germans don't trust me. And I think it's because they learned from themselves. Anyway, I've got this smaller extension hose running into the motor down through the dipstick. This goes down all the way to the reservoir. And now I'm just going to pump. And so this is not going to be instant gratification. You're going to have to put in a little bit of work to get this out of here. But you want to go nice and low so that the suction continues. Yeah, this is a bit of a pain in the butt. But you tell that to someone who's driving a Chevy Malibu. This is worth it to me. Not that there's anything really wrong with a Chevy Malibu, other than build quality, craftsmanship. But I drive a Mercedes for a reason. These are the best cars in the world. And what's even better is that they tend to be made for rich people. And what are rich people? Notoriously cheap. So you always buy the car that requires the least amount of maintenance, and worse comes to worse, if your Fortune 500 company's not going so well, Mr. Fat Cat can go out and change the oil himself. Alright, so we got the car back level again. We're going to check and make sure that this reservoir is empty. So again, set up the hose. New oil filter, down and in place. You feel it click when it's in the right spot. Put the guy back in, and as always, turn it backwards first till you feel it click. Then you know you're not going to cross thread. There we go. These guys aren't on there too tight, but the way that I know is that mine, the lettering on top of it lines up with 90 degrees from the motor. So I've got just a little hair more to go. There it is. Lines up perfectly with my motor. And now comes the magic part. We start putting in the oil. This is the new purple stuff that I was telling you kids about in the beginning. All right, so here we go with the purple power. This is trippy. Never seen purple oil before. This, of course, is a 5-quart. This car holds a total of 8. Everyone I tell that to seems astounded that these cars hold 8 quarts of oil. But what they don't understand is, as long as you keep your service records, as long as you get the transmission flushed and looked at, as long as you change your oil, Mercedes-Benz will give you a powertrain warranty for life. No one else does that. Hence the reason why the transmission is locked shut and it won't let me mess with it. That's because they don't want some douchebag crawling underneath it and doing damage. So that's 5. 6. It's so trippy, purple oil. And that's number 8. All right, and as always, voila, changed oil. You're all set. Let me get the engine shroud, the upper engine shroud. And we are good to go for another 14,000 miles. That's right, 14,000 miles. Try doing that in a Chevy Malibu. All right, last thing we're going to do is we're going to reset the service interval on the dashboard. Okay, something went awry when I did the reset for the service interval. What you do is you put your key in. I'm not going to be able to show you this time because I already reset it. And then, like I said, something went wrong. So after the beeping stops, you'll see the mileage pop up. You then hit this button. Then you will see how many miles you've gone over. Then after you see that, then you press this button, and then it'll bring you back to that menu again. The mileage will pop up again. You then press this reset button right here and hold. Then it will ask you if you want to reset, and you confirm by pressing R once again. And that will reset your mileage. In conclusion, altogether, this cost me for the new purple oil, I believe that was $72. My new oil filter was $15. We didn't cover it today, but I did change out my air filter. That was another $22. But getting to tool around when it starts cooling off like this down here in our beautiful state of Florida, it's priceless, my friends. Please feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Be sure to watch my other videos. Darkside Garage.